just coming back to your book, you have this blueprint, this framework that includes 7 steps to really help organizations and leaders with more flexible working arrangements. Take us through some of those steps.
Yes. So we have 7 steps that don't have to necessarily be adopted in chronological order, but it's important to start with number 1. So what we advise organizations and leaders to do is to first set your why. What is your purpose behind flexible work? What are the principles that you're embracing across the entire organization? Great example of a principle is we're taking a growth mindset. We're going to experiment and we're going to figure out what works best, what doesn't. I'm going to realize that this is a constant learning process. There's no one size fits all perfect approach. Another example is we're going to make sure that we optimize for equity so that people, regardless of where they're located and how they work, have equitable access to opportunity. In order to actually get to those principles, you need to set the appropriate behavioral guardrails. And I think it's really important for leaders to realize that people are watching at what they're doing. What we oftentimes advise executives about is you should be the last ones back into the office rather than the first ones in the office. Meaning, if you're saying that flexible work matters, then you need to be actually embracing that tone with your own behavior. The guardrails that you set are really critical because for so long, the workplace has expected people to set their own boundaries. Boundaries are self-imposed. Many people don't feel empowered to set their own boundaries. I struggled with that throughout my entire career, but setting those intentional guardrails and modeling them on an executive level are critical for then setting the tone for your broader organization to do what works best with our team. And speaking of team, what we've seen in the market is that these top-down mandates across an entire giant organization, they're not working. Employees are revolting. Work is not one size fits all. So team-level agreements are opportunities for teams to get together and figure out their norms, their communication styles, their working hours in a way that works best for them. And as I mentioned earlier, experimentation matters. So encouraging leaders to experiment. That's step 4. And giving them tips on how to actually get feedback and build an experimentation framework to figure out what's working and what's not across their organization. Now, in terms of steps 5, 6, and 7, I mentioned earlier about building a culture of connection. Technology is a big piece of building connection, but so is the office. So this chapter focuses on ways in which you can bring people together, whether in person or in an offsite, as well as how you can fill in those gaps between those in-person moments with technology. And then we focus on a really important chapter. I love this chapter about reskilling managers. What we're seeing from the data is that managers are struggling because they're trying to translate what executives are telling them to do, but they're also getting a lot of upward feedback from their employees. They don't necessarily have the tools to manage effectively in this new distributed world of work. And so this chapter really focuses on what are the 3 key areas where managers need to develop skills in order to build psychological safety for their teams. And last but not least, we've spoken about outcomes over the course of this conversation. The last chapter is to measure success. We oftentimes get the question of how do I know that this is working? And so with a few case examples from Boston Consulting Group as a start, we talk a bit more about what outcomes and measurement look like in this new world of work.
So can you give us an example of an organization that has done this effectively?
Yes, we talk about a range of companies throughout each of the 7 steps, but I'd love to actually go back to the schedule flexibility bit that we talked about earlier, because the focus of the book is not just flexibility in terms of where you work. Really, the focus is about when you work. And we highlight a great example of the journey of Dropbox. Early in the pandemic, the Dropbox executive team, they were struggling with how are we actually going to align and figure out a plan forward. And so what they did is they said, we're closing down our offices and we're actually building studios. We're converting our offices into studios where people can come together to collaborate, to build camaraderie, as well as to build connection with one another. But you need to schedule these studios beforehand, and it's an opportunity for team leaders to bring their teams together on a periodic basis. But we're also going to embrace schedule flexibility. And so what they did is they developed something called core team work hours. And in the book, we have an image of what their approach looked like. But they basically said, against time zones, we have 4 hours a day where our teams get together. As an example, Pacific time zone, it could be from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And this is our time to discuss, debate, decide topics, to have our one-on-ones, to have our recurring meetings. But outside of those chunks of time, you are welcome to work when works best for you. And this is revolutionary because we've always been in the 9 to 5 mindset, and this shifted things from a linear workday to a non-linear workday. And we brought some of these practices actually into our own team at Future Forum. And as a working mother of 2 young kids, it's been wonderful for my working life because I'm also a natural night owl. So what I've been able to do is have my core teamwork hours, be an effective leader, but also drop off my kids at swim practice, pick them up from school, maybe even work out, something I never did prior to the pandemic, make dinner. You know, there's other things that I could do during that 9 to 5 period, and then do some of my focus work in the mornings or in the evenings. So giving employees that choice has been wonderful in terms of the results that Dropbox has seen with regards to recruitment as well as retention.
You know, you said your last chapter talks about success and measuring success and things. So in this particular example, how was success measured and how did they do?
Yes, that's a great question about Dropbox. So what we have seen in talking to them is that they really wanted to focus on goals with regards to financial objectives, as well as performance with regards to work outcomes and recruiting and engaging employees. And what they saw from the data after they rolled out this digital first or virtual first way of working was that they saw a 3-fold increase in applicants, 15% faster time to hire, and a 16% increase in diverse candidates. We're very early on in this journey, and these are preliminary numbers that they shared, but they're telling in terms of the battle for talent that we're seeing, the great resignation. If you're giving your employees choice, you're letting them work when works best for them, but you're also setting the appropriate guardrails and setting the executive tone from the top, what you're going to see is more interested, engaged, and happier employees.